My name is AJ Springer and I'm the Alpha Phi of the Alpha Psi chapter at McGill University. Tonight I'm joined by Brother Noah Viera, our chapter historian, to recount both World War I and World War II within the context of Alpha Psi. Along the way, we are going to honor a fallen brother from each of these periods. I will start with World War I, and then Brother Viera will commence with World War II. In 1914, 30 Alpha Psi brothers were accepted for military service. Throughout this period, perhaps the most notable achievement was the establishment of the McGill-based hospital. It was led under the direction of Colonel H.S. Burkett, Alpha Psi 86, containing over 600 beds. The hospital is composed almost entirely of McGill men, with 12 of those under Burkett's command being Alpha Psi Zates. These Zates were later joined by Brother Lieutenant Colonel Dr. John Alexander McCrae, who penned the immortal poem in Flanders Fields in memory of the fallen while in France. The hospital became known at McGill in March of 1915 when it was mentioned in the McGill chapter letter. We read that over half the staff of the McGill Hospital is composed of brothers in Zeta Psi. In a subsequent chapter letter in April 1915, it was noted that possibly the unit that is of most interest to Alpha Psi is the McGill-based hospital, or as it is perhaps better known, the McGill Zate Hospital. Ultimately, World War I ended with 75 casualties among 186 Zate brothers in active service, 27 of whom were from the Alpha Psi chapter. From another chapter letter, we are able to grasp a summary of the Canadian Zate service in World War I. When the Great Grey ships came in, bearing on their last voyage from over there, the surviving wounded and those untouched who remained to claim their honorable discharge, it would be found that the Alpha Psi and the Theta Psi had contributed as their quota in behalf of the Empire's preservation no fewer than 278 of the bravest souls in Canada. Following World War I, there were two memorials to Alpha Psi brothers. The first, Percival Molson Stadium, dedicated in 1920, which was built mostly out of the funds bequeathed by Brother Percival Molson for that purpose. Secondly, the stained glass window in the medical building, memorial to three Zate lieutenant colonels, John Alexander McCrae, R.P. Campbell, and H.E. Burkett. After World War I, Alpha Psi entered a period of reconstruction. They continued to select members from the McGill student body. There were so many prominent and famous elder Zates in positions of great esteem and influence that it was often stated jokingly, but not entirely mistakenly, that the Zates ran the city of Montreal. I'd now like to take this opportunity to introduce Brother Alan M. Oliver. Alan Oliver was born March 15, 1893 in Edmonton, Alberta. As a teenager, he attended St. Andrew's College in Aurora, Ontario, where he was a football star and would later be a prominent star in both football and hockey at McGill. Oliver was quite the athlete all around and was a member of the Royal Ottawa Golf Club as well as the Rideau Tennis Club. On April 7, 1915, Oliver graduated from McGill with honors in economics. On the same day, he left for an artillery course in Kingston, which would be the precursor to his enlistment in World War I. Following the artillery course in Kingston, Oliver enlisted in Valcartier, Quebec within the Army, Canadian Field Artillery Unit in the 7th Brigade. He went overseas to France with the 25th Field Battery in July 1915 and would later transfer to the 26th Field Battery. In 1916, he was awarded the Military Cross. The Military Cross is awarded for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty, where Oliver handled his gun under very heavy fire with great courage and determination and set a fine example to his men. 2 weeks later, on November 18, 1916, Oliver was killed at age 23. He was doing dangerous night reconnaissance well beyond the front lines of Desire Trench in Saint-Eloi. Oliver was buried at the Bapaume Post Cemetery, the Somme, France. Survived at the time by his parents and his one brother, Lieutenant Jack Oliver, who served at the front with the Canadian Engineers. There are a few notable details following Oliver's death. Firstly, he was commemorated on a plaque in the entrance of the Royal Ottawa Golf Club. He was also commemorated on page 143 of the First World War Book of Remembrance. Furthermore, his mother set up the Alan Oliver Fellowships in his honor. Established by Mrs. Frank Oliver of Edmonton, Alberta, in proud and loving memory of her son, the late Alan Oliver, MC, BA, Lieutenant, 26th Battery, CFA, who was killed in action at the Somme on November 18, 1916. Lieutenant Oliver was an honor graduate in 1915 in the Department of Economics and Political Science. This award is awarded to the students who stand highest in the first-class honors in each of the departments of economics and political science at the final BA examination. The holders are required to pursue studies in economics and political science at McGill or elsewhere, and no application is required. I will now turn the presentation over to Brother Viera, who will outline World War II before describing the life of Charles Francis Hart.
Looking at the Alpha Psi chapter's involvement in World War II, we see many young men were sent off to war at the beginning of World War II. By 1939, active chapter membership was under 15 men. By the end of the war, the Zeta Honor Roll had added another 17 names to it. These names are permanently placed on a bronze plaque in our chapter house. This plaque commemorates our young men who served in both world wars. We're now going to take a moment to honor our fallen brother, Charles Francis Hart. Charles Francis Hart was born on August 23rd, 1911, in Montreal, Canada. He was a proud Canadian citizen. He resided at 1498 Sherbrooke Street West. He was married on October 5th, 1940, to Lorraine McKimmey of Westmount in the St. Andrew's Church. Sadly, when he passed, he left behind an infant son named Charles. Hart was enrolled at McGill University from 1929 to 31 as an arts major. During Hart's time at McGill, he was a member of the Zeta Psi fraternity, namely the Alpha Psi chapter. During his professional career, Hart was a stockbroker and also a member of the Montreal Stock Exchange. On May 20th, 1942, after hearing of his passing, the chairman of the Montreal Stock Exchange paid tribute to Hart. He was the first member of the exchange to pass in service of his country. Hart's military career started as an aircraftsman in May 1940. He was given his observer's wing before proceeding overseas, where he was given his commission as a pilot officer in February of 1941. Hart became a member of the Royal Canadian Air Force, where he was stationed in the 7th Squadron. A story to come out of Hart's military career was his family heard word that he was presumed missing in June of 1941. But it was later discovered that he had been forced to land in Portugal. He and his crew were fine and stated that they were very comfortable in the finest hotel. He and his crew were then transferred to Gibraltar and then to England, where they joined their squadron in action. He was then later reported missing during operation on September 3rd, 1941, and then sadly was believed dead on October 22nd, 1941. Hart was buried in the Rheinberg War Cemetery in Germany. He was laid to rest in grave number 1-7, row C, plot 6. He was buried with 6 other members of his crew. The majority of those now buried in the Rheinberg War Cemetery were airmen.